Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Jackie Robinson Day is one of the biggest days of the entire Major League Baseball season. On April 15th each year, baseball honors the man who broke the color barrier, showed immense courage, and inspired Americans across the country. In 1997, 50 years after Robinson broke the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers, his iconic number 42 jersey was retired throughout all of Major League Baseball, never to be worn again by any future player or by any other player who wasn't grandfathered in already. However, one decade later, in 2007, future Hall of Famer and one of the greatest outfielders of all time, Ken Griffey Jr. had an idea, and called up Commissioner Bud Selig to discuss it. What if, on Jackie Robinson Day, he wore the number 42 jersey as a way to honor him? Selig fell in love with the idea, and in the conversations that I've had with the former commissioner of baseball personally, who had nothing but glowing things to say about Griffey, he was immediately on board with this tribute. The practice expanded eventually to the point where today, on April 15th each year, every single player, coach, and manager in Major League Baseball would wear number 42 in Jackie Robinson's honor. That raises the question, what would happen if the NFL did something like this? Obviously, I'm not talking about everyone wearing the same jersey number. That would be ridiculous, because you wouldn't be able to tell who was eligible or not. If you said that a certain player was ejected, you would have no way of verifying that the person actually got ejected because they're all wearing the same jersey. And it would be a nightmare for announcers and for coaches watching tape. It's feasible to do this in baseball, because even if everyone wears the same number, you know where everyone is on the field at once, but that's not the case in football. However, what if one person, like a Ken Griffey Jr., wanted to change their number for one game to honor someone important to them and important to the history of the NFL? Well, we're going to find out the answer today, because in 1999, one player tried to do just that. And Commissioner Paul Tagliabue's response, if you know the NFL, wasn't too surprising. This is the story behind the controversy surrounding Marshall Faulk, Walter Payton, and the NFL. Before I talk about the actual controversy in question, we need some context to understand just how good the two players involved were, because these two guys were two of the greatest running backs in the history of the National Football League. In 1999, the St. Louis Rams were looking like the best team in all of football. Truly no one saw it coming. I'm sure a ton of people thought that the Rams, after losing starting quarterback Trent Green in the preseason with an injury, and being forced to go with a former Arena Football League quarterback in a relatively unknown Kurt Warner, that they would be one of the worst teams in football. Instead, it was the exact opposite, because the Rams were taking the football world by storm. Through 7 games, they were 6-1, comfortably atop the NFC West by 3 games, and currently holding on to the number 1 seed in the NFC. The Rams were well on pace to make it to the playoffs for the first time since moving to St. Louis, and with their league best point differential of plus 151 and their greatest show on turf offense, it's not too hard to see why that was the case. And perhaps the best player on that incredibly talented Rams team was the man you've been watching this whole time. This is Marshall Faulk, and in case you couldn't tell, or in case you didn't know, he was really, really good. The Rams acquired him in a trade with the Indianapolis Colts during the offseason, giving up a first-round pick to do it. And the trade paid immediate dividends, as I'm sure the Rams had no problem paying that price for a man who would become one of the greatest running backs in NFL history. Faulk was well on his way to winning the AP Offensive Player of the Year award, as through 7 games, he was on a completely different planet compared to his peers. He had 592 rushing yards on a whopping 5.7 yards per carry, and had 37 receptions for 387 yards. If you're doing the math at home, that gives him 979 yards from scrimmage through 7 games, for an average of just under 140 yards per game. Near the halfway point of the season, he was on pace to finish the year with over 2,200 yards from scrimmage, which would have been one of the all-time top totals in the NFL, and he eclipsed that mark in 1998 as well, so he was picking up right where he left off. Without Marshall Faulk, the greatest show on turf is not the greatest show on turf, as he was arguably the most important part in that offense, which is saying a lot. And for years, and especially in St. Louis, Faulk had drawn comparisons to this man right here. This is legendary Chicago Bears running back Walter Payton. And let's just say that anytime you're being mentioned in the same breath as Walter Payton, you know you're doing something right. The comparisons made sense from a logistical standpoint. The man who drafted Faulk with the Colts, Bill Tobin, was with the Bears when Walter Payton was drafted by them, so the comparisons were natural in that regard. But in terms of play style, the two men were also extremely similar, as they were both electrifying backs who moved with grace in the open field, could switch directions easily, and could make an impact in both the running and the receiving game. I would be here all day if I listed everything that Walter Payton did in his illustrious NFL career, but I'll do my best to try and recap the highlights. He made it to 9 Pro Bowls. He was named onto multiple All-Decade First teams, making it onto the All-1970s and All-1980s team. For anyone to do this is incredible, but for a running back to do this is out of this world. He was named the Offensive Player of the Year and the MVP in 1977. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I'm guessing the conversation between the writers on whether or not to induct him took all of about 10 seconds. By the time he retired after the 1987 season, he had 16,726 career rushing yards, which was first in NFL history, and was more than 4,000 yards above second place. This was at a time when only 6 players in NFL history eclipsed the 10,000-yard mark. He had 110 rushing yards, which was also first in NFL history. And he had 21,264 yards from scrimmage, which was first in NFL history and was nearly 6,000 yards above second place. Basically, if you named a category applicable to running backs, there was an extremely good chance that Sweetness was atop the list, and was not just holding down the number 1 spot, but was holding it down convincingly, where it looked like no one was even going to come close to touching it for the foreseeable future. And Payton wasn't just an incredible player on the field, but he was an incredible person off of it, who always did things the right way. I'm not sure there's a single soul on this planet that had a bad thing to say about Walter Payton the person, because he was famous for his generosity, his charity work, and his willingness and desire to help others. There's a reason he was so loved in his community. There's a reason that he was named the NFL Man of the Year in 1977, and there's a reason that that aforementioned award now dons his name. Walter Payton was maybe the greatest to ever do it, and even today, many people regard him as the greatest running back in NFL history. However, tragedy struck in 1999, when Payton was diagnosed with a rare liver disease and was unable to get a transplant in time, as he was dealing with bile duct cancer. No one knew about his bile duct cancer, as he withheld that information from the public. On November 1st, 1999, Payton tragically died at the age of 46, with the world having lost a great man way too soon. The tragedy struck the NFL world in particular, as prior to each game that took place in Week 9, a league-wide moment of silence was held to honor his legacy and his incredible life. But for Marshall Faulk, he wanted to do a little bit more to honor the man. Remember, Faulk absolutely loved Payton. In a later interview, Faulk would say that Payton was the man he aspired to become, and said that he idolized him as a kid. Faulk wanted to go above and beyond to pay tribute to his hero and his inspiration. And he wanted to do that with a complete uniform change. Because for this 8th game of the season against the Detroit Lions, Faulk, who was terrorizing defenses all season wearing the number 28 jersey, wanted to terrorize defenses wearing the number 34 jersey. After Faulk heard about Payton's death, he was absolutely devastated, as a lot of people around the NFL community were. And shortly after Payton's death, Faulk realized what an honor it would be if for one day he could wear the number 34 jersey and continue his legacy. With that, on the night of Payton's death, he called team trainer Todd Hewitt and asked if he could wear the number. And at least by all accounts, Hewitt and the team had no problem with it, and they loved the idea. I saw nothing indicating any objections on the side of the team. If Faulk, who was compared throughout his entire NFL career to Walter Payton, wanted to wear Payton's jersey number for this game, then good for him. However, any move would need to be approved and cleared up by the league. So even though the Rams seemed to be on board, it wouldn't make any difference if the NFL wasn't on board as well. The day after Payton's death, and after Faulk requested this idea, he would call the NFL offices and asked if Faulk could do this. And the NFL loved it. They thought this would be a fantastic tribute to Payton's legacy, thought this would be an extremely fitting way to honor him, and had no problem with a one-time exception to the rule. I'm just kidding, they immediately said no. Whether or not you think the No Fun League moniker is valid or not, there's a reason why it exists, and it's partly because of incidents like this one. Because the NFL, even though it probably felt the pain that Faulk was dealing with, wanted nothing to do with this tribute. The NFL had an extremely strict uniform code. Heck, this was the same league and the same commissioner that in 1993 fined New York Giants quarterback Phil Simms a whopping $1,500 because he wore his socks too high. Seriously. Knowing their past history, and since this is 1999 that we're talking about, the odds that the NFL was ever going to approve this were about as great as the odds of New Kids on the Block somehow overtaking NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys to become the most popular boy band in the country at the time. It was just not going to happen. Per the NFL rules, for competitive purposes, no player can change his uniform once the regular season begins. If Faulk tried to pull this stunt and change his number, he would be subject to disciplinary action, with the punishment likely being significant since he would have been deliberately disobeying NFL rules. And even though Faulk's agent, Rocky Arsenault, was working tirelessly to persuade the NFL to change its rules this one time, it was not going to happen. For this game against the Detroit Lions, Faulk was stuck wearing his usual number 28 jersey. On one hand, for the NFL to reject Faulk's decision seems insanely classless and foolish and short-sighted. You have a player, arguably the best player in the sport right now, who wants to honor one of the greatest players of all time after his tragic death. A player who was maybe the most well-liked player in NFL history. A player who exemplified everything that a representative of the NFL should be on and off the field. And a player who would become the namesake of the Man of the Year. And you're not going to let Marshall Faulk honor him because it violates your arbitrary uniform policy? How can you say it's for competitive reasons when you allow players to change their jersey number from the preseason to the regular season, which makes it tougher on the coaches for the first few weeks of the season when they're looking at film, and when you allow two players during the preseason to wear the exact same number, meaning that theoretically, you could have a situation on special teams where two guys are wearing the same exact jersey, which is obviously confusing. How does that make sense? It's an easy PR win, and for the NFL to deny this just makes it seem like they're missing the bigger picture. On the other hand, even though Faulk had noble intentions, I completely understand where the NFL was coming from, and completely understand this decision. Allowing Faulk to do this maybe creates a slippery slope. What if another Hall of Famer were to die next week, and Faulk wanted to wear the jersey number of that player for that game? Meaning that now, Faulk would have 3 different jerseys in 3 weeks. What if 2 players on the same team wanted to honor a player by wearing their jersey number? How do they decide who gets to do it, since 2 players can't wear the same number? Who gets to decide what jersey numbers can be honored with a switch? Sure, Walter Payton seems like an easy one, but what if a teammate tragically dies? What if it's another Hall of Famer who might not be as well known in the public eye, like Jimmy Conzelman? If you allow a switch to honor Walter Payton, then where do we draw the line? You get the idea. It is an extremely slippery slope, and opens up a whole can of worms that I'm not sure the NFL wanted to deal with, or have the capability of dealing with. In their mind, the easiest thing to do was just say, in a clear-cut and dry move, that once you got your number in the regular season, so long as you were on that team, you had to stick with that number. End of discussion. Still, the message sent by the NFL was clear. No matter the circumstances, you cannot violate the uniform policy or alter it in any way whatsoever. It was a valiant effort and a noble effort by Faulk to honor an icon, but the NFL was going to have no part of it, whether right or wrong, and Faulk dropped the issue immediately after that. And over his illustrious career, where he made the Hall of Fame, made 7 Pro Bowls, was named the first team All-Pro 3 times, was named the Offensive Player of the Year in 3 consecutive seasons, and was named the MVP in 2000, Faulk played in 188 games, including the playoffs and Super Bowl 34 and 36. And in all 188 of them, whether they were with the Colts or the Rams, he wore the number 28 jersey. But I'm sure to this day that Faulk wishes he only wore that number in 187 of them, because for one day, he wanted to honor Walter Payton by wearing his number 34 jersey. And even though it didn't work out, as a tribute to sweetness, the idea was incredibly sweet. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.